Good evening, everyone. It's indeed good to be here, Mr. Minister, members of Parliament, distinguished guests on the dais. I wish, first of all, of course, to thank Brother Ras Bushman, the freedom fighters, and all others. It takes a tremendous amount of work, but the big thing, of course, is always the vision. You have the vision, then you do the work with the commitment, and you make it happen. And you've made it happen 16 times, and that's wonderful. Ras Miguel told you about some visa problems that he had as a Jamaican. It seems as if Jamaicans tend to have visa problems in a lot of places. I heard about this Jamaican that went to Australia, and when he went to immigration, showed him his passport, and I looked at the passport, said, "You're Jamaican?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you have a criminal record?" The Jamaican says, "Why? Do you still need a criminal record to get into Australia?" But I think this is a very important evening for what we have mentioned before, Marcus Garvey's birthday, the celebration, etc. But if I'm not mistaken, I think I heard the beginning of the St. Martin Revolution. I think that when I come back next time, St. Martin will be independent. And I hope in your independence that you join us in Jamaica and carry on. Marcus Garvey sought to create a world in which Africans could live with self-respect, which was sustainable, and which, while meeting human needs, did not degrade nature, which was our source. This was a very African vision based on our original understanding of right order, Ma'at, present from the first time in Zeptepi, which is the beginning of creation. This was a moral vision based on values that put humans first and was not dependent on the logic of intellectual assumptions, materialistic ideologies, or the extractive logic of industrial capitalism. Of course, before we can speak of a vision, we need information. And that information about our history and situation has to be unbiased. As Marcus Garvey said, and we've heard the quote before, "A people without a knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." If the information is missing, incomplete, or distorted, then the model that is designed to implement the vision will be wrong. And the implementation will be misdirected, and the process will miss the goal of the vision. Marcus Garvey in 1910 traveled throughout Central and South America seeking information about the condition of the life of African peoples in the diaspora. From 1912 to 1914, he traveled throughout England and Europe to study and understand the European and colonial powers at home. He also learned about Africans and the continent from Deuce Muhammad Ali as he worked with him on African Times and Orient Review, which is a weekly magazine published in London. He met African students, sailors who traveled to Africa from English ports, and he read voraciously. He attended classes at university and observed the workings of the British Parliament. With this information, he concluded that African civilization had been destroyed by European and Arab invasions, and that it needed to be reconstituted. On his way back to Jamaica aboard ship, it came to him while laying in his bunk that it was his job to inspire Africans to redeem Africa. His mantra was, and you have to say it again, Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. Shortly after landing in Kingston, Jamaica in July 1914, he formed the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. During his lifetime, he defined Pan-Africanism and led the largest mass movement outside the continent of Africa. At its height, the organization had a membership variously estimated at between 6 million and 11 million, with 1,200 divisions in 40 countries from America to Zambia. The organization newspaper, The Negro World, was the largest Negro weekly in the United States and was published continuously from 1918 to 1933. It was printed in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French, and even though banned in many colonial territories, it penetrated them all. From Kenya in the east, South Africa, and to Senegal in the west. His main principles of organizational effort were 1, to unite all African people in a fraternal bond based on a common identity, common source, common beliefs, history, and culture. 2, to develop a nation-state in Africa that would lead to the future freedom, independence, and unity of other African states. 3, self-reliance. The paradigm for development was African, not European. It was communal, inclusive, cooperative, and socially just. The economic policy was to regulate the use and flow of capital for the greatest good. There was no free market and no invisible hand. 4, education. He said, we're going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. We recognize that education began with the spiritual essence of the human being, and this had to be nurtured in order to guide scientific materialism, which on its own was leading to chaos and disaster. His idea was not a human blank slate that had to be imprinted with information, whose physical and mental abilities had to be trained for particular jobs. He felt that each individual was a divine expression whose qualities had to be nurtured to manifest the full human potential to benefit self and community. The word education comes from the Latin exducere, which means to lead out of, and that was the original meaning of education. 5, culture. He saw culture as the milieu in which people develop, and as such could be used as an instrument to change the dependent psychology of the previously enslaved and colonized African person. His use of titles, symbols, images, propaganda, and parades are without parallel in the motivation of the African. His social and political philosophy was a major impetus for the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, and he had a similar influence in the Caribbean in the 30s. His theosophy and theology predated Black liberation theology, and indeed all liberation theology. As Ras Miguel said, he said that we should, while God was the Spirit, we should look at God through the spectacles of Ethiopia. And he said Jesus Christ, he could trace his ancestry to the line of Jesse in the Old Testament, and he had the blood of all peoples in him, a large portion of black blood. So you should take down pictures of Michelangelo's cousin and put up a black Jesus. He was the first one to make black dolls. The Negro Factories Corporation made black dolls. So he felt that in order to socialize young black children, they should play with black dolls so they'd learn to be affectionate towards their own people. There is no area of African nature that he did not cover in his organization, structure, and philosophical teachings. Psychology, culture, education, religion, government, economics, business, entrepreneurship, trade, investment, character development, etc. He was completely dedicated to the unity and development of African people. Here are 3 verses of a poem that he penned in 1927 in prison in Atlanta. It's called The United States of Africa. Hail, United States of Africa, free. Hail, motherland most bright, divinely fair. State in perfect sisterhood united. Born of truth, mighty thou shalt ever be. Hail, sweet land of our fathers' noble kin. Let joy within thy bounds be ever known. Friend of the wandering poor and helpless thou. Thou light to all, such freedom reigned within. From Liberia's peaceful western coast to the foaming cape of the southern end, there's but one law and sentiment sublime, one flag and its emblem of which we boast. So here he was his vision was of a United States of Africa in 1927. The model was set, but it was resisted by colonial powers, the American government, and short-sighted black people. Miguel mentioned the trial in New York, etc., and the many, many attempts to destroy the organization and to destroy him as a person. The implementation, however, was incomplete, and the goal had not been reached at his death in 1940 at the early age of 53. The torch was passed to the preeminent continental Pan-Africanist, Asajifo Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah said, "Long before many of us were even conscious of our own degradation, Marcus Garvey fought for African national and racial equity. I think that of all the literature I studied, the book that did more than any other to find my enthusiasm was The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, published by his wife." Malcolm X said, "Every time you see another nation on the African continent become independent, you know that Marcus Garvey is alive." It was Marcus Garvey's philosophy of Pan-Africanism that initiated the entire freedom movement, which brought about the independence of African nations. And had it not been for Marcus Garvey and the foundations laid by him, you would find no independent nations in the Caribbean today. All of the freedom movement that is taking place right here in America today was initiated by the work and teachings of Marcus Garvey. Martin Luther King said, "Marcus Garvey was the first man of color in the history of the United States to lead and develop a mass movement. He was the first man on a mass scale and level to give millions of Negroes a sense of dignity and destiny and made the Negro feel that he was somebody." Jomo Kenyatta said, in 1921, Kenyan nationalists unable to read would gather around the reader of Garvey's newspaper, The Negro World, and listen to an article 2 or 3 times. Then they would run various ways through the forest, carefully to repeat the whole, which they had memorized, to Africans hungry for some doctrine which lifted them from the servile consciousness in which Africans lived. He further said, "When I met Garvey and listened to him in London, I became a Garveyite." The Pan-African mantle passed to Kwame Nkrumah after the 1945 Manchester Conference. He returned to Ghana in 1947 and began his political struggle, which led to the independence of Ghana in 1957. For him, that was but the first step. He said, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is followed by the total independence of all Africa." And his mantra was, "Africa must unite." Together with others, they formed the Organization of African States in 1963. This was a compromise because he wanted the United States of Africa to start immediately. But there was a Casablanca group and there was a Liberia group, and Emperor Haile Selassie was the mediator between them. So the Organization of African States was formed as a compromise in 1963 with the headquarters in Addis Ababa. If you look now at Africa, we see another scramble for Africa that is similar to the 1884-1885 scramble that came out of the Berlin Conference when European nations simply sat down and carved up Africa. Well, now it's not only European nations, it's the Arab, it's the Chinese, it's the Japanese, it's the Indians, it's everybody. And unfortunately, our leadership has been decimated, and globalization is in full force. I won't go further into that because that takes us a little bit far afield, except to say that, well, first of all, the AU, the African Union, which was the follow-up for the Organization of African States, was formed in 2002. And recently, in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the African Union, the chairperson of the Commission of the African Union, Madame Zuma, told us of her dream of African unity for 2063. Now here was Marcus Garvey with a vision and a plan in 1927. And here is Madame Zuma, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, talking about African unity in 2063, with no policy directives to carry this about. So not only have we made no progress, we've gone back. Martin Luther King told us of his dream of little black and white boys and girls holding hands and facing the future together. Presumably this will come about by laws passed in Congress. I don't think anybody believes that in the United States the conditions are post-racial. There's a difference between a vision and a dream. A dream is wishful thinking and depends on others to make it a reality. A vision is your personal creation, and it is your responsibility to achieve the goal. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a young black man, a writer for the Atlantic Monthly, recently wrote a book. It's a memorandum to his son. How do I live free in this black body? And it's an indictment of the continuing racism and violence that meets the black man every day in the United States of America. He was invited to the White House and was speaking with President Obama. And at the end of it, President Obama says, well, you know, we shouldn't give up hope. Ta-Nehisi Coates wasn't too satisfied with that, and neither am I. Hope is no substitute for the will and courage it needs to implement your vision. Hope is the opiate of the masses, served up by apologists for the status quo. Did hope die in South Carolina with the murder of 9 African Americans by white supremacists? Did our dream cease with the fragile psyche of a black woman in Texas manhandled by a white racist cop over a minor traffic accident? The reality is that we still cling to a system that is a product of a materialist culture that has led Europe to attempt to colonize the world, steal whole continents, enslave a race of people, perpetrate genocide against other ethnicities, bring the world to the brink of nuclear disaster, while depleting the non-renewable resources of the planet and creating deforestation, soil erosion, toxic waste, pesticide buildup, and global warming. This is clearly an expression of a suboptimal system of scientific materialism based on dualistic thinking of self versus other, that separates individuals from each other, humans from their environment, and seeks to replace nature with machines and shopping malls. The essence of this system is individualism, competition, and control. We cling to this phantasmagoria of hell on earth because our minds have been conditioned by 500 years of European dominance on our forced dependence. Marcus Garvey in 1937 said we must liberate our minds from mental slavery. And he further said, I have an original African mind, which meant that he had worked through all the lies, negative propaganda, and dehumanizing assumptions to access his unconditioned consciousness. If we want to create change in the world and not just dreams in our heads, we must undergo a similar transformation. We must be the change we want to create. Self-transformation is hard work, but there's no other option as we actually do face extinction. They say once there's a will, there's a way. Well, what is will? Will is the force available to us to direct consciousness, and consciousness is what experiences life. We have allowed our life to be guided by a habit-formed consciousness, and therefore we have a habit-formed will. Our consciousness has been focused on our physical needs, our thoughts, and our emotions. We function almost automatically at a habit-formed consciousness level. We're not born programmed as lower animals are. We're the only species that can be conscious of consciousness itself and can therefore program as well as deprogram our habit-formed consciousness. We need to direct the flow of consciousness by our own free will. Free consciousness directed by free will. We need to increase the power of our conscious will so that it will be stronger than our habit-formed will. This power is developed by exercising it. So carry out each and every action on the basis of conscious will, rather than habit-form will. And since they both get their energy from the same source, the stronger your conscious will gets, the weaker your habit-form will become. And you become master of your own house. Mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. Knowing others is intelligence, but knowing yourself is wisdom. Marcus Garvey said, God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves into what we want to be. Follow always that great law. There is no height to which we cannot climb by using the active intelligence of our minds. Mind creates, and as much as we desire in nature, we can have through the creation of our own minds. There is no part that man has played that you, when you become conscious of yourself, cannot play, when you direct that consciousness with the full power of your will. God gives the land, and man builds the city. God hasn't built any city on this earth. God didn't build St. Martin. God gave the land. You have to do the building. What is it that we want for ourselves, our children and our grandchildren? Each of us must answer that question for ourselves. Broadly speaking, it's a way of life that supports humanity and enhances the world rather than exploiting it and polluting it. We must be in harmony with ourselves, with others, and the environment. We, like Marcus Garvey, must lead by example. This work of personal transformation and societal change will not be done for us by governments and corporations. And we cannot continue waiting for another charismatic leader. We've lost too many of them. Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Steve Biko. So many have been killed and marginalized. Walter Rodney, Maurice Bishop, etc., etc. However, it will be done by little people like you and me working together, setting an example that will incrementally change the world for the better. We're not powerless. We have got the power. Our power lies in the rightness and order of our vision, laid down at the first time. We can change the world. Yes, we can. Up, you mighty people, you can accomplish what you will. Thank you.